All right, so I'm going to start, before I get into the pictures of all the pretty pictures, I'll just give you a quick 5-minute background on me. So I actually have a picture of myself on my very first cave trip, which was in 1972. I had a helmet with no strap that kept falling off. I had this funky little lantern that I had to hold in my hand, and every time I bumped it, it would go on and off. So, but for some reason, I loved it. So a few years later, I've gotten more sophisticated. I've got a helmet that stays on my head. I have this thing up here. Let's see. This is a carbide lamp. I think there's probably some in the museum. But in the 70s, when I started caving, that's what we used for light primarily. And then a backup electric light. And this is actually a humor shot because I'm using a giant flash bulb for a close-up. That bulb would normally be used for lighting up giant rooms. So fast forward to a more recent trip, and now we're pretty much, all cavers are using LED lighting. So it's lightweight, the bulbs don't burn out, the batteries last pretty much forever compared to what we used to have. So, as Karen mentioned, I've been taking pictures in caves ever since I started. And this is actually my photo kit from this was an expedition in 2009 to Laos, where it was sponsored by National Geographic. I was the photographer. So this is all the stuff I brought to take pictures in this giant cave. So mostly all these things here are guns I built to fire these flash bulbs. And they're the old style thing that you use once and you throw away. And then, but more typically I use all these electronic flashes, and they'll be synced to the camera with a slave unit. At first, these slave units were things that saw the light and went off, but now they use a radio-controlled transmitter. So that's much less problematic. So when I've been caving, let's see, I guess I've been caving like 24 years, and I've been a member of this National Speleological Society the whole time. The editorship of their monthly magazine came up, and they asked if I would take it over. So at the time, it was all black and white, and occasionally there would be a color cover, and it was all done with cut and paste, markup and all that, making half tones of the prints photographically. So overnight I changed it into an all digital publication for production. So the very first issue I did was on the left, and it just happened I had an article I was going to submit to them, but when I found out I might be editor, I said, I'm going to wait and publish my own article in color. And then on the right is one of the more recent issues. So I've been doing this for 25 years so far. So this is actually the oldest logo of the society. I always liked this one, but they abandoned it like 20 years ago because they thought it sent a poor conservation message because he's touching the stalagmite. So this is our current one. I think less interesting, but it's easier to reproduce too. So if you're interested in what the society does, it's easy to remember the website. It's just caves.org. So along the line, I also got interested in educating people about caves. And there's all sorts of people that go caving. So everyone can use some information about caves. So in the 90s, when the internet was just really getting going, I started this website called the Virtual Cave. And it it's a huge educational website, and you can get to it on caves.org. It's the easy way to get there. But it has sections devoted to all the major types of caves, like solution caves, which is everything I'll be showing you today, lava tubes, sea caves, and caves formed by erosion, like glacier caves or granite caves. So it's a huge thing. Now, most of you are familiar with stalactites and stalagmites, little means for remembering which is which. This was actually a postcard from one of the show caves back in the 50s or so. So on the virtual cave, you're presented with this diagram. You can see there's about 40-some different types of cave formations. And this is an image map where you can click on one of these things. This is a good diagram because it shows the context of them. So some things hang from the ceiling, some things are on the floor only, some things formed underwater, some things formed above water. So this kind of gives you an immediate sense of how they relate. And then this is what a typical page on this website is. This one is devoted to draperies. And so there's a description usually, and the idea is to make it a pretty simple description, like not get into heavy-duty science or anything. And then you get a few pictures showing you the variety of draperies. Then on a lot of pages now I have thumbnails that open up into much bigger pictures. So let's see. So I have these actually split up into a few different folders, so I have to navigate between them. So I'm going to start off by talking about the show caves in the area, because I've been lucky enough to have a working relationship with all four of them at different times. This has allowed me not only to do pictures for them and sell them, but in several, almost all of them, I've been able to go off trail, see what else they had to offer. So this is what you get if you put in caverns in Google Maps. And it came up with a few things I didn't know about, like the Cavern vineyards. I'll have to check that one out. But there's 4 main caves in this area. 3 are in Calaveras. California Caverns, Moaning, and Mercer. And then there's the Black Chasm, which is up in Amador. So I'll just show you a few things from each of these that I've shot. So here you have a cave map. Probably most of you haven't really seen a cave map. But and this is one of the things that we as cavers regard as the first step in studying or learning about a cave. So it's all done by taking compass and tape measurements. So it's all very accurate in that sense. And then someone actually has to take a sketch, and they mark the stations on the sketch. And later, they get it all together by making the sketch fit the line plot that you made with your numbers. So California Caverns, or Cave City, is actually about the longest cave in this whole region. There's close to a mile of passage there. And it has, it's also got, in terms of most of the caves in this area, the most walking passage of any of them I've ever seen. As it turns out, we have a lot of tight stuff in our cave, which you'll see coming up. So they have a walking tour that's only open, it's not open year-round because parts of it flood. And if you've been in there, you've probably seen this thing they call the womb room. It's this tiny little hole that you can slide down into a lower section. And then they do these off-trail tours there. I think that's their biggest money maker. So This was actually a staged shot I did for them of it. I had to tell them to put a little mud on their face. And just a little, this is a little upper level passage that overlooks one of the main rooms there. And then it's one of the famous rooms there is the wedding chamber. So presumably weddings have been held in this room. I think they call that the bridal veil, that formation. So the signature room in here is, they call it the jungle room. And it was discovered, like most of the cave was discovered in the gold rush days. So there's a lot of damage in it, but they dug into this one, like maybe 30 years ago. So there's a lot more pristine stuff in there. So it's always nice to see this kind of stuff that's not broken. So you'll see this in other pictures that I have, but besides the soda straws here, the squiggly things are called halictites. So this is all in that jungle room chamber. And then this is now kind of a defunct thing, but along the lines, I think it was maybe 10 years ago, the owners of California Caverns, the Fairchilds, bought or leased this Gold Cliff mine, which is just, it's off of Gold Cliff Road here in Angels. In fact, for years people had told me they knew a cave up behind the hills in Angels Camp. I was dubious because there's no limestone right in town here, but it turns out there is this mine. It was a gold mine. So the Fairchilds did they were just adventure tours into this cave for a while. So they asked me to come and take photos of it. And at one point I think they were going to develop it with paths and lights, but I think that never came to pass. But just, unlike a lot of mines, this one is incredibly stable because it's in granite, so it's a much harder rock.
What were they mining there, Dave?
Gold.
Oh.
Yeah. And interestingly, it has a few cave formations, and this is actually an incipient drapery. You saw that in the virtual cave, those angel wing type things. But I've never seen one that's purple before, so there's some interesting chemistry in that rock there. Okay, and then Mercer Caverns is right up there in Murphy's. I've had a long-running relationship with them. I took all their publicity pictures. I made their brochure here, and I made their website. So that can't recommend them more highly. They run a good tour, and it's a very unusual cave too, and I'll explain that. But here's the brochure, and let's see. So of course a map, and this is both a plan, and the plan view on these cave maps is how would it look if you had an X-ray machine and you could look down from above, and then the profile is 90 degrees to that. So if you looked through the side of it, so Mercer is an unusual show cave because it has so much vertical to it. You go down, I think altogether there's something like 400 stairs going down and then back up the other side. So this is my all-woman tour group that I recruited just by accident. All the ones that I invited that came were women. the guy on the left is the Mercer tour guide. I don't know if he's still there or not. These are all draperies that are forming. It's quite unusual in that there's so many of them in parallel like that.
Excuse me, on the Mercer's Caverns, you can go down, can you go up the other side?
Yeah, you come out a different entrance.
Because there was wooden stairs there years ago, they said they closed them off.
They probably repaired them since then. Definitely you can go, yeah, it's a through trip. So this is actually a part of Mercer that's, you can see it from the trail, but she's up off the trail there. So nothing too unusual in this cave until you get to the bottom of it. I'll show you that. Oh, just one of their signature things behind this platform there is this pair of stalagmites. And this is, every cave tells you not to touch anything, but a number of them will offer up some sacrificial formation, like here you can touch this one. So these are the ones people have been allowed to touch. But to show you the difference between what touching does and how it probably looked originally, that's the back side of this thing. So that's what touching over the years, the oil on the skin and such, will do to these white formations. And this is, so a couple of the things that Mercer really has that are outstanding are these large draperies, also known as angel wings or bacon. And the reason there's different colors is that as water percolates down from above, it'll pick up different minerals at different times. So sometimes it'll pick up iron and you'll get more of a dark orange. And other times it won't pick up iron, it'll be more pure. Then you'll get a whiter or even almost clear look to it. So this is going down into the organ loft. And this formation is one of my favorite in terms of what it's named. It's called the Lasagna Factory. And there that's looking straight up on it. So I don't think I've ever seen it. It's a drapery like those other things you just saw, but it's quite unusual the way it's shaped. I can't say as I've never seen one that quite compares to it.
So what is the consistency of these draperies? What are they made of?
So draperies are made from the same material that stalactites or stalagmites are made. But because they're formed on a sloping surface, the water is running down that surface and depositing. And then it just keeps building up over time. Whereas stalactites tend to be just a straight drip off the ceiling. So, and often you can have them combined, like you can have a drapery and a stalactite will form along the bottom of the drapery. So you'll probably see some of those in these things ahead. So at the bottom of Mercer, there's something quite unusual, and that's aragonite. And aragonite it's like a calcite cave formation, but it has magnesium as part of the makeup instead of just calcium carbonate. So that makes it form these spiky crystals. And these are a real challenge to photograph. I think I've tried 3 or 4 different cameras and lenses and techniques to do it, but the problem is they're deep, so it's hard to keep it all in focus. But as you can imagine, they're quite delicate, so they're the kind of thing that they definitely don't want visitors to get near. So they have, the main mass is next to the trail is behind a plexiglass sheet. So this is the only cave in this area that I know of that has this. But aragonite in general, I've seen caves that are full of it, basically. So, but it is still a relatively rare formation. And here's an example of a drapery it's got no impurities, so it's pretty much pure calcite and is practically clear. So I think this is called something like the bridal shawl or something. It's on the other segment of the trail in Mercer. Then, has anyone ever done this rappel and moaning thing? No. So that's what's going on here. So moaning is actually, I mean, of all the show caves I know of, moaning is the only one that is actually a pit rather than horizontal passages. So you're actually going down from the top to the floor is like 180 feet. No, 160, I think. So, of course, most people don't do the rappel, they take the stair, but I'm shooting from the stair. As it turns out, you don't want to do this rappel in the winter because I didn't realize that my friend was sitting here getting dribbled under a waterfall. As I kept saying, just one more, just one more. So here's the whole thing. So this stairway the spiral staircase is like 100 feet high. And it was built in something, I believe, 1910 or so. So apparently they check it periodically to see if it's going to fall apart. But let's see, so the nice thing about this pit is it's quite well decorated. I've been in lots of pits where you drop down and there's nothing but rock around it. But this one has got all sorts of large stalagmites, like this thing on the left, the igloo, and it's got flowstone cascading all the way down. So in fact, in terms of cave formations, this is called flowstone, and it's by far the most common cave formation out there. So caves that may not have any stalactites or stalagmites usually at least have a little flowstone. And that's, again, formed exactly the same way as the others, but it's just something that cascades down the wall.
Hey Dave,
Yeah.
can you tell the story about why they call it Mummy's Cave?
Oh yeah, so supposedly, there's like little holes in this flowstone, like where the water has been coming down and eating down into it. Supposedly, at certain times of year, it'll hit in those little pockets and make a sound. Seems to be like moaning. I've never actually heard it. And that's at the bottom of the drop in there. So these are just a couple from their little wild tour. And that's probably the part of the wild tour anybody claustrophobic doesn't want to do. You have to slide up this tube on a knotted rope. Okay, well, Black Chasm, that's up in Amador, and the thing about Black Chasm is it's also a very vertical cave. It's developed over about 160 feet. So this is your plan view. The profile view kind of shows it better here. So you can see pretty much all the trail there. It's only, the cave has about 4,000 feet of passage. The trail is maybe 600 feet. So I was lucky enough to do a survey of this cave. So I got to see pretty much every square inch of it. And it's a beautiful cave. I'd say of all the caves in the Mother Lode, it's probably the most spectacular. But it's also the one that they don't have a wild tour, so all you will see of it is this upper part. So they call this the landmark room because it's a federally designated national natural landmark site. That's an official designation. It's called that because of the halictites. And I'll show you some close-ups of those. But this is the end of the trail in there. So these are also draperies. And now I've showed you the tourist trail. Now everything else you're going to see is off the trail. So there's a chamber up above the tour. In fact, you look through a hole in the ceiling of that room, and they have it lit up there, and it's this whole other chamber up there. And this is a type of cave formation called boxwork. So what happens there is you get the limestone has cracks in it that are filled in with other minerals. They can be calcite like cave formations, or they can be even quartz veins, which is what I think is going on here. And this stuff is really heavily eroded, but it's more resistant, so it doesn't dissolve away at the same rate that the limestone that encases it does. So this is up above that landmark room. So Chasm has this great mixture of lots of stalactites, draperies, and halictites all sandwiched in between. More draperies. Those black layers we think have something to do with periods of forest fires. And the carbon particles got into the groundwater and seeped in. So this is actually in the landmark room, so you would see this cluster of halictites. And in fact, you'll see lots of these halictites in the landmark room because that's what it was named for. This is their signature formation they call the dragon. And this is also in the landmark room. This was also on a postcard I made for them years ago. So I wouldn't say it's the best halictite cave I've ever seen, but it's certainly the best I've seen in California.
Your photography work is amazing.
Thank you. And these are draperies, but they're completely clear, which is something you don't see very often. So there's some, I'd say the marble in the Calaveras formation is a very pure marble, which is probably why they like to quarry it. More of the halictite, so I'm climbing up here to an upper level. And not using the halictites as footholds. So these are just in this little upper chamber that sits up above the landmark room. One thing about this area was that it was exceedingly wet, so They all have drips on them and they're still actively growing. And then there's something real unusual we discovered in there is, so this is where a pool of water used to be. So it turns out when you get a pool of water sitting for a long time in a cave, you get all sorts of crystals that can develop. And in this case, there were some very unusual crystals. Most crystals are just like dog tooths. You know, they come to a point, and then there's another type that's known as a triangle calcite with 3 sides. But in this case, this was probably the surface of the pool, and water was hitting it in a drip, and it became a 6-sided crystal. And I haven't seen these anywhere else on Earth, actually. So these are the more typical crystals you'll get in a pool. So they call this pool spar. So this is also in Cavern. Here what happened is you had a regular old stalactite, and it grew in air. And then at some point, and this was, there was a period of flooding millions of years ago. It's associated with, for instance, Noah's Ark and such. It's a geologic event that really occurred. So a lot of these places filled up with water, and that's what happened here. The stalactite was submerged. It's like the thing where you put a sugar crystal on a string and hang it down in a solution of water with sugar. And then we did find in another one of these rooms, it turned out there's more of these 6-sided crystals. So there's more than just that one spot. And a few more off trail in Black Chasm. I call this thing the disco ball. And it was another big thing, it was draperies and all this, and then it got buried underwater for who knows how many millions of years. Or probably more like thousands of years. And these kind of formations are also pretty rare. That we would call them lotus pads. And then on the end you have shelf stone. And this was a little chamber we squeezed into. I had to take practically everything off to fit into this room and hold my breath. I got in and I've never been back in it again. But this is, I was talking about halictites. Well, this one scrolls up from the floor. We call it a haligmite, so that it's like the stalactite, stalagmite dichotomy. But then the formation itself we call the snake dancer. And this whole thing was underwater at one point. So these are yet another bizarre type of underwater crystal. And this is some vertical drops that we went up and down in this cave. So Black Chasm has about 3 or 4 different arms that go up vertically. We had to climb up all of them to make the map. So that on the top is a giant halictite that's a foot long. I entered this in a photo contest once, and it was titled, "Oh my God, it's so big." It's quite unusual for a halictite even at the angle that it appears. You rarely just see it at 90 degrees straight like that. Then in the course of surveying this, we climbed out over a rift, and we're pretty sure no one had ever been in this part of the cave. and we dropped down, that's a lake down below. And we came back another day with a raft so we could cross it. And this whole area became a beautiful room that we called the Chamber of Secrets. And this is what they call the Hall of Arches. And this is the other side of that drop you just saw. And there's a lake down at the bottom of that one too. So it turns out that in a lot of my pictures you'll see like this blue-green to the lakes. And what really brings that out is setting a flash down in the water. And then it just picks it up and glows this beautiful blue-green. And that blue-green comes from the limestone that's dissolved in it.
Did you hear that?
Yeah. Well, actually, so in Black Chasm, the water table moves up and down a lot. So there's always lakes at the bottom, but the height of them varies quite a bit. But there's a lot of lakes. There's probably about 6 different lakes that we crossed in rams. So I made them, a while back, I made them a bunch of different postcards. We made one of this lake. But this is where I learned show caves don't always pick the images that have anything to do with what tourists are going to see in the cave. So for a while they had an off-trail adventure trek. This was part of it, going through this horrible mud. But the problem was then people would climb up from the bottom of the cave, up all the railings and stairs. So it became a real problem keeping the mud off of the railings and stairs. Plus this had all these helictites on the ceiling, but to avoid them you had to crawl in the mud instead. So they were getting damaged. Fortunately, they stopped doing that trail. Okay, let's see.
Have you ever been lost in a cave?
I have. But somehow I found my way out. But I've never had to be rescued or anything like that. Backtrack. So actually it's fairly rare. More typical is that I'm lost in the sense that I can't find a part of a cave I'm looking for, as opposed to being able to find my way out. So, but the best trick to visiting a complicated cave is to go with somebody that knows it really. So I've been lucky that in my caving career, I've had lots of friends all over and places in fact, as a member of this NSS, we have a directory. I can cold call somebody from Kansas and say, I'm going to be out in your area, can you show me any caves? Usually they're pretty good about, like, yeah, we'll set up a trek or something. Okay, so now moving on. So something in between a show cave and a totally wild cave are the natural bridges. And I'm sure has it pretty much everyone been to this, or who hasn't been down here? So a few of you. So I won't try to repeat that. So this is the cover of the book I produced on it. And I have some with me if you're interested afterwards. They're $10. But so there's 2 of the natural bridges, and one thing I did was that no one had done before was make maps of them. So it turns out by carefully mapping them, the length of the upper one is 240 feet, and the length of the lower one is 180 feet. So they were, there's a lot of history to them, and that's part of what's covered in the book there, is that basically they probably weren't very well known until the gold rush. And there was a fella, he certainly came to mine the area originally. And his nickname was the Old Batch because he was a bachelor. And from about the late 1860s till just after the turn of the century, he had a little resort thing going on down here. Like he built a road to get down there. Actually, part of the trail down there now is part of that old stage road. And he had a picnic grounds, and he had a house that was on top of the bridge, apparently. That's why there's fig trees planted there. So one thing he did was, this is another historical photo from the 1880s or so. He built a dam. And actually, if you go upstream of the upper bridge, you'll see all these rocks piled up along the side of the creek. They're apparently from this dam. And he would do this seasonally. He would remove it and then restore it. The reason he built it was to try to get, he engineered the floor so that instead of having to swim through it, you could walk through it on a dry path. In fact, this is a turn of the century postcard that shows his path. So I've actually made 10 different postcards of the natural bridges, which I think the museum was selling or might still have some of them. I think I brought some along too. So what I'm going to do is just sort of show you a photographic tour through each, starting with this is the upper entrance to the upper bridge. So these are all going to be a mix of flash and daylight, or in some cases just flash. But the bridge, unlike a lot of things called natural bridges, this bridge is unusual in that it's not just a hollowed out area from a river. It's constructional in nature. That is, you had springs that deposited all this material, this basically calcite material, just like stalactites or stalagmites. But it came out on the surface, and it all piled up in the creek. And the creek at that time had a lot of gravel in it, so when later on it started undermining, washing out that gravel. So it continued to build up above, and then it hollowed out underneath as well. So in that sense, it is like a natural bridge in that the creek had a role in enlarging it. It's a popular place for swimming. So this was interesting. One day I was in there and I was setting up a picture, and I had all these flashes strung out, and different people holding them. This crew of ladies came floating into the picture. I said, "Is it all right if I take your picture?" And they said, "Sure." And I said, "And while you're at it, watch out for piranhas." and one of them says, "How did you know?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "Well, we're the piranha swimsuit." So I call this my meditation rock, because when I used to hike down there a lot and no one was there, I could go wade in about 100 feet and sit on this rock, just listen to the water dripping and the sounds of the thing. But now it's so rare to ever have it to yourself. But one day I was on this meditation rock and I was shining a light into the water, and this is what happens. You get these beautiful reflections that bounce off. And I actually shot this with a cell phone. middle of the bridge. This area is always pretty dark. But this is all lit with flash.
Is that the lower or the upper cabin?
This is the upper. So this is the middle of the upper bridge. And some of these formations have historic names, like on the left there, you see this thing is a flowstone mound. It's called the pulpit. And supposedly, at times, old backs would get up on top and give some kind of a speech.
So people that go there, do they mostly swim through it?
Yeah, so to get through the upper bridge, you have to swim at least 60 or 70 feet. And otherwise, if you know just the right path, you can wade out quite a ways.
Is the water cold or is it mild?
It's cold, but like I wouldn't want to go through it right now. But in the middle of the summer, it feels pretty good. So the thing about the water is there's all these kind of deep pools under it. So a lot of it, when you're swimming, it's still pretty cold on the bottom. And it's spring water, so the temperature of it doesn't change that much. It's like any water that comes from underground. So in the spring especially, you get a lot of drip water coming in. And some of this water is year-round, that you see these curtains, but in the spring you get the most spectacular runoff. Again, a popular swimming hole. This was a shelf that's in the upper entrance, and it has rimstone dams that form on it. What was interesting was in the spring you'd have this beautiful set of dams, and then in the summer it would all dry up and people would walk all over it, and it just didn't look like anything. But then come the spring it would deposit all this stuff again. So this is looking out at the curtain of water. So I had always wanted to do a picture of this with a flash at night to get this curtain. So this is like maximum spring runoff. So it's nighttime, but I have a big, powerful studio flash behind her there, synchronized with the camera. And this is done completely differently. So instead of a flash, which a flash is like goes off in a thousandth of a second or faster, this is using a bright LED light. So this is about a 4-second exposure. So you get a very different effect on the water than you do. This is my Singing in the Rain tribute. Let's see, let me start the Gene Kelly song here. And later I did one looking in. I call this my high-tech selfie. I pressed a button and fired the camera and 2 flashes. And then I've done some outdoor pictures where I did long exposures of the drips. So there's a lower bridge, and in the spring you get a waterfall forming on the left side. So this is the upstream end of that lower bridge. And we made a map of that too. So this bridge was apparently used in the gold rush for housing miners for several weeks. So it has a nice large entrance. And interestingly, it has a little side passage that you can crawl up in, and it has this beautiful flowstone. Used to be beautiful. You don't want to see this now. Somebody has spray painted on it. And let's see, you don't really need a boat to go through this, but I had some people that wanted to carry one anyway, so I said, well, I could get some good pictures. I took my little niece there years ago. So one interesting thing the lower bridge has in it is it has a spring that comes out right in this hole above this. So it's formed all these brimstone dams that are a classic cave formation. It's flowstone, and then the little basins are called brimstone dams. And it's basically the same mechanism that's deposited all the material for the bridge. And again, this is something, this particular flow will dry up in the summer. That's the lower end of the lower bridge. So yeah, here's what it looks like, and then somebody came up with that one. Somehow thought that was an improvement. And then a very interesting ceiling above that lower entrance. And that's what you see when you come out. This is all these travertine deposits. Thousands of years that built up. Okay, there's one more section. Wild caves. Okay. I don't know if I have to end promptly at 3 or... Okay. So this is the last section. So wild caves are basically any cave that doesn't have any improvement made to it. And in our county alone, there's probably at least 150 of these. So, the only thing I'm going to show you about this geology is, so here's the river, and this blue stuff here is the limestone. So we have a big thing of the limestone, and it goes down. This is Columbia down here, so there's a lot of it around Columbia. It goes up, it crosses the river. The river is cut through it. So in fact, it's exposed caves as it did so. And then there's scattered bits of it near Murphy's, and up near Cave City, there's a pot of it. So it's a pretty big slice of it, and it's hundreds of feet thick. We do have caves that are as deep as 400 feet.
Where are we on the map? The American
Let's see. They call it Altaville. So this is actually a geology map. The USGS has a thing where you can zoom in on any area. Didn't it just do that like 5 minutes ago? So this is our, I want to say limestone, but in our region, actually most of California, the caves are formed in marble rather than limestone. So I mean, chemically it's the same stuff, it's just that the marble is limestone that's been compressed, made harder. So it's a little harder to dissolve. Otherwise, chemically, it works the same way. So we have a lot of outcrops over here and there that I think are beautiful in their own way.
like Columbia? Like Columbia?
Yeah. Yeah, now, some of the stuff like in Colombia and such has actually been exposed by the hydraulic mining. So we have a lot more on the surface that's been exposed that way. But then we have these other areas that are just naturally exposed too. So we have a lot of areas like this that are just full of little holes and fissures, and some of them open into caves, and some of them you squeeze down into and they don't do anything. So I'll just show you a few highlights here. So some of these are caves that you can find easily, like this one is a Forest Service cave, Bunnell, and it's down in Tuolumne County, and it's actually on the Forest Service map. So, and I think they have a fence around it that I think you can actually ask for permission to go in it. But there isn't really much to go in. It's mostly just a big sink, and there's a lake down underneath there. You can see the reflections, but in the 1950s, the lake there was explored with scuba diving. And it went down pretty deep, and they came up in a chamber beyond it. And it actually still probably has more to explore, but the Forest Service won't let anybody go. So this is, so a lot of our caves around here, the wild caves, are vertical. So you need rope and training to know how to get up and down. And sometimes the vertical caves just go down and end, and other times they have passage at the bottom. But you can see they often involve squeezing too when you're on rope. Sometimes more squeezing than many would be comfortable with. My personal rule is if I have to exhale fully to fit through, and I'm on a rope, that's a non-starter for me. And most of these caves are, they're kept pretty low key. So we don't like to see anybody publishing where these are, because then they end up with spray paint, people breaking stuff. But the cave clubs will usually run trips to these things. If you're at all interested in exploring these kind of things, we do have the caves.org has a link to various cave clubs that are in our area. The closest is actually Sacramento. Some nice marble outcrops. Sometimes, even though all the caves are in marble, sometimes you don't really see the nature of the marble because it's all covered with mud or flowstone. But sometimes you get really nice exposures of the marble like this. And you can see all the layering inside. This one is like an 80-foot drop. So lots of squeezy bits. The occasional lake. Here's a cave that's very shallow, so you see a lot of roots coming in from the bottom. But it's fairly unusual. Most caves are deep enough that you don't get a lot of tree roots penetrating in. This is in an area somewhat near the natural bridges that has a lot of exposed marble. Different caves punctuated in it. And these kind of ceiling formations you get when a cave has been slowly dissolved away. So they're called anastomoses. Same cave. But when you see this kind of stuff, you know that it's been formed by water. It's been formed, dissolved away by when it was underwater, as opposed to erosion that happens once the cave is drained, and then water can come into it and start acting on it like a regular stream channel. Here you see the kind of structure that guides cave formation, a joint or a fault. And we do have bats in some of the caves. These are called Townsend's long ears. And we have critters like this in a lot of the caves. So I mentioned the lake cuts through marble. If you kayak up the lake or take a boat, there's maybe half a dozen caves I know that are best accessed that way. And as the lake rises and falls, some of those caves will fill up completely. Others will be exposed only in the droughts. This one, for instance, is usually always open and is right above the water. But I went during the drought and couldn't find it until I realized it was 100 feet up above me in the cliffs. So it made a huge difference how to get to it. These formations on the left there are called shields. They're fairly rare.
What caused that?
The shields. So the shields tend to come out, they're like squeezed out of veins in the rock. So instead of being a drippy thing, they tend to form like a sheet of stuff that comes out of a crack. And they can also they usually always have kind of a disc. The disc can be oriented in different ways. Like I've seen them straight up and down, which is even more unusual. More typically, they're kind of on a tilt. And this is one of the many caves that sits above the river. So you can see the upper reaches of the stand there. You can see the water line. And here's an example of one of the little caves that's, actually this is in the hills above Moni. But the main thing about a lot of caves here, they tend to be dry and small and have lots of tight stuff. This is a well-known one called Crystal Palace that is a long hike down to it. You drop about 1,200 feet. And it was historically shown as a show cave, so there's remnants of such things in there. This is another one of these shields. This cave suffered a lot of damage, but it's still got a lot of beauty in it.
Where is that?
Crystal Palace, it's near the South Fork of the Stanislaus. So you have to approach it from up top. Although people have tried from the river, but it's definitely easier from up top. The club has a trip there every year to Sacramento. So some of my friends formed this Western Cave Conservancy about 15 years ago. they've slowly been buying up or leasing different caves in the area to try to protect them. So the ones I'm going to end up with here are caves that are managed by the Western Cave Conservancy. And the general thing about them is they're always, they try to make the caves accessible to people, usually with guided trips. And, that way they're preserved. People can still see them. They don't just close them down. So here's an example of why you want to protect some of these. But that's old graffiti that was made with liner lamps, probably. So this was actually their first acquisition called Ripple. And it's up near Amador City. And this one is called the Catacombs, and it's somewhat near to Cave City. It's right off the hot dog turnpike, no, the corn dog turnpike. There's actually a road sign that says, calls the road that. But you can see all this is another one of these caves that's been eaten away, dissolved away below the water table. You get these kind of forms. But even this cave, the water in it will rise and fall with the seasons. And it can be times you would have to swim to visit this cave. So they're pretty much just going to take people through in the summer. And then this was their most recent acquisition. This is over near Volcano. So they're mostly sort of vertically oriented caves. They've seen some damage. Like this was a broken stalactite that's trying to grow back. But it could have been broken 100 years ago. And some are vertical. Not the best, not the most beautiful caves in the world, but certainly worthy of protection. And a lot of them are going to need some cleaning, like this should be all white, so it might be possible to scrub off some of the mud where people have just, they've had muddy gloves or muddy hands, touched it all. Although that can happen naturally too. So a lot of nice white formations. Okay, and I'm going to finish up with, outside of the show caves, this is the most spectacular of the Mother Lode caves. And it's a Forest Service cave, and it's all locked and gated, but the Western Cave Conservancy manages it. So we take, there's like 5 or 6 of us who can take people in. Each of us can go once a year. It take 5 people with us. So this cave was actually opened up by miners. There was no known entrance, and miners dug into it. Fortunately, the guy who dug into it decided to preserve it rather than destroy it. But compared to most of the caves there's been very little damage to it.
Is it more horizontal?
It's horizontal once you're in there, but to get into it, they had to put like a culvert pipe that drops down 20 feet. So you actually have to use rope and vertical gear to go into it. So in fact, it's also a very tight thing to go down. So, like when I come out I can only step up about an inch at a time on my ascenders. It's not for the claustrophobic.
Yeah, has anybody discovered they're claustrophobic once you get down there with them? You had anybody go wacko?
Well, in this cave, pretty much everyone we've taken has been, experienced, as opposed to, like, I wouldn't take a beginning caver, just because, not only for their sake, but for the sake of the cave. There's places you have to be careful, like, move under something that's low hanging. You don't want somebody that's not paying attention to what they're doing.
Do they have to be pretty thin?
Yeah, I mean, relatively, it's not a matter of having to be, exceptionally small or anything. It's all in how much you want to fight with the cave to get in. It does have a lot of really nice, so these kind of formations that are orange have got iron mixed in with them. But it's definitely one of my favorite caves around here. So they call these the lion's tails, and they're probably more of these formations that were inundated by a pool, group crystal zone. So a lot of nice intact formations. A few halictites like this one. Some more of these spar crystals. And then one small area it's so delicate that we decided that, general tours won't go up there. So these are more of these shield type formations. So this cave is probably about 3,000 feet long, with a lot of stuff packed into it.
Is there precious metals in it?
Yeah. So actually, when they found it, they probably realized there was nothing to be gained by digging around in there. Unfortunately, there wasn't a big market for stalactites. They'd be gone otherwise. Here's a good example of these rimstone dams I mentioned. And then this is what we consider the most delicate part of the cave. It's almost hard to believe that's not ice. It's the purest calcite I've ever seen. And that's the last one. So
What's the depth?
depth.
How deep are you?
I mean, as far as from the entrance, you're probably only about less than 100 feet deep. Below the surface, it's, I'm not even sure, a couple hundred.
Do you find many spiders in the caves?
Um,
Worried about bugs?
yes, I mean, they're a common cave dweller. In fact, one of those rooms that you saw was with the shield was called the hanging ballroom, and it has this little spider sack that was there that they named it for. And it's still there like 50 years later after they named it. And there are some caves with indigenous spiders, like around Santa Cruz has one. But, our spiders are tame compared to what you'll see in the tropics.
Any snakes?
Snakes? Oh yeah. It's not uncommon to see garter snakes, or actually there's a pit, I had a picture of it here, but near Mercer Caverns that they asked us to explore one day. Halfway down we heard a rattle. This coiled up rattlesnake was sitting on a ledge like 5 feet from the rope. So we all made our fastest rappelling climb ever to get down. And then of course we had to go back out. So I sent everybody else first. I said I had to stay down and take more pictures. But the thing barely budged. So I think when they get in the cave and it's cooler, so they're not as active as they would be if you encountered them on the surface in the sun or something. But
How much camera light do you take with you? How do you get all these pictures out of just a single camera?
so most of the pictures are taken. I have these little electronic flashes, and usually I carry at least 3 of them, sometimes 4, and then they'll be all linked with a radio transmitter. So when I pull the trigger, they all go.
You mentioned that.
Yeah. The old school way would be to take a tripod, and then you could fire these flashes manually. And that was the old. But the newest approach I have is using these lights that we use for caving. These LED lights are incredibly bright. So you can even get these big light panels. So I've done ones where you set the thing on a tripod and you just light it with those LEDs. Or if you have a cell phone with a night sight function, that's revolutionized things. Now, you used to have to use a tripod if you were going to use the LED lights, but those things are so good in low light that you can dispense with the tripod. So I call it guerrilla cave photography. Literally, you could just take your friends' lights on their helmets and say, all right, you aim yours there, you aim yours there, and take the picture that way. The only drawback is, there's a lot of headlamps that have different color temperatures. So it might look like a Christmas scene because some might look blue and some might look yellow. So you have to figure out if they match up in color. But you can always just bring your own lights and hand them out to people and say, here, use this one. So I've been doing more of that. Somehow as I get older, I don't want to carry as heavy a pack.
Do you disturb the bats when you go in? I'm worried about the bugs.
If we know it's a hibernaculum for bats, we avoid it. So in fact, the cave clubs will publish lists of caves that are closed for bats, and some are closed during when they're hibernating, and others are closed during a nursing season because you don't want to have them drop on the baby. So cavers are pretty good about those closures, but there's a lot of people that aren't organized cavers and have no clue. So the only other possibility is if it's Forest Service or likewise they have a gate.
I remember in 1961, I was at Carlsbad Caverns, and they told us when we came out, stay till dusk. And then that's when the bats started coming out. I mean, like, thousands of bats coming out. It was just the creepiest thing. I think they were all inside when we were there.
Oh, yeah.
Going through. But they just swarms of them at dusk.
And that's not even the biggest bat cave in the U.S.
Isn't it? It was, I've not forgotten it.
Yeah, it's pretty
I was like 10
spectacular.
years old.
Where's the biggest?
Probably in Texas, there's what's it called? Something like Frio Bat Cave. It's a nature conservancy preserve, so no one can go in it, but you can go and watch the bats come out and view it. But it's probably got 10,000 or more bats that come out every night.
Does anybody else have any questions?